Most of his victims were young men and boys, many of whom were vulnerable due to their socioeconomic status or personal circumstances. Gacy targeted individuals who were less likely to be missed by society, often picking up young runaways or those searching for work. Gacy's victims were often led to believe that they were simply meat in a kind stranger who would offer them a job or an opportunity. Once the victims were lured into his home, however, the true horror would begin. Gacy's house, particularly the space under the floorboards and crawl space, became a macabre tomb for his victims. The house itself was built in such a way that it concealed the atrocities taking place within. The floors would be dug up or disturbed in areas where bodies could be hidden, and some victims were even buried in shallow graves in the backyard or discarded in nearby rivers. Gacy's choice of victims reflected the very nature of his crimes. They were often marginalized, isolated, and vulnerable, and Gacy knew that his victims would have little support or recognition in their absence. His ability to deceive and manipulate was evident. He charmed his victims into a false sense of safety before revealing his true intentions. It wasn't just the murders themselves that were horrifying, but the emotional and psychological manipulation Gacy subjected his victims to. The trick of the handcuff trick, one of Gacy's most notorious methods of gaining control over his victims, was by using what he referred to as the handcuff trick. Gacy would ask his victims to trust him by allowing him to demonstrate how he could quickly and easily cuff and uncuff them. In his words, this harmless trick was an icebreaker, allowing him to bond with the victim once the handcuffs were locked. On the victim's wrists, Gacy would often mock them, tightening the cuffs and demonstrating his dominance, but this trick was anything but harmless. Once a victim was restrained, Gacy would torture them, often sexually assaulting them before strangling them to death. Many of his victims died from asphyxiation, as Gacy would use a rope or cloth to strangle them. Others were brutally beaten or subjected to other forms of cruelty. The final indignity often came after death, when Gacy would discard their bodies as if they were nothing more than refused. As his methods became more refined, Gacy's thirst for violence and control grew more intense. He would often keep his victims' remains for long periods, engaging in what can only be described as a macabre form of souvenir hunting. He took pleasure not only in the act of murder, but also in the idea that he could keep a part of his victims for himself, almost as trophies of his power and dominance. The growing toll a neighborhood unaware. What's even more disturbing is that throughout this entire period of violence, Gacy maintained a facade of normalcy in his neighborhood. He remained involved in local politics and charity events. He even managed to charm those around him with his wit and charisma. He was seen as an upstanding member of his community, known for his involvement in local social events and for being generous to children's hospitals and fundraisers.